Hey, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, either here in Stockholm at the World Water Week, in this room physically. Some of the participants are here in this room, even if this is a fully online session, or whether you are comfortably in your. Sorry, there is some echo here. I think there is some. Yeah, sorry. So whether you are comfortably listening this from your home or from your office, everybody, very warm welcome to this session. Most likely your first session in the 2023 Stockholm World Water Week. My name is Jorge Alvarez Sala. I am WASH specialist at UNICEF headquarters, and I will be facilitating this session on systems strengthening and leadership for sustainable WASH services in practice. Let's have a look to the agenda for today. Okay, so the program for today will start with some opening remarks from Federico Profezzi, which is sitting next to me. He is the Chief Technical Advisor at UN Water, and he will give some keynotes about what is next and what shall be done in systems strengthening and sustainability after the UN Water Conference that took place in March 2023 in New York. Actually, this session is a follow-up session of a side event that was organized back in March 2023 on the same topic, but this time we are going to hear more practical examples of initiatives on sustainability and systems strengthening, which is the second block of this session. The session will be moderated by Gilles Tagne, which is a regional advisor at the Africa Change Hub at IRC. As speakers, we have Evita Rosenberg, which is the policy officer in water at the DGIS, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the government of the Netherlands. We will also have Andy Robbie, who will share with us how integrating water and climate policies and plans are happening in some countries and the scorecard. Andy Robbie is a senior water security advisor at FCDO, the government of the United Kingdom. And we will also have a very interesting presentation on the first sector-wide sustainability check conducted in Nigeria. To my understanding, Jonathan Ekator, who is a WASH specialist at UNICEF in Nigeria, is going to present on behalf of the government of Nigeria. But we also have Nicholas Madu, who is the director responsible for water supply at the government of Nigeria. And we will also have Eugene Kane, who is a senior WASH specialist at the Liberia Water and Sanitation Commission. I hope Eugene could join today. This is the first block. The second part will be a panel discussion with key elements in systems strengthening and how do we move forward this agenda. This last block will be moderated by Kevin Russell, who is the Regional Coordinator for Africa at the Sanitation and Water for All Partnership. And the speakers will be Alejandro Jimenez, the Director of WASH at SIWI, and Farai Tunhuma, who is the Senior Advisor for Water and Climate Resilient WASH at UNICEF headquarters. So those are the panelists. This is the agenda for today, and I hope you enjoy this session. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, I encourage all of you to use the chat box and to raise questions or comment or reflect. We would like to have this as much interactive as possible. But without further delay, I would like to pass the floor to Federico Profezzi, the Chief Technical Advisor at UN Water, who will give us some opening remarks. Federico, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here in the room and also in the virtual room. The real discussion is happening later, so I don't want to really be long. We all know about the conference in March. We all know about the body of 800 plus voluntary commitments, the water action agenda, and how this is, this affects, it's basically, it's a global agenda, but with national country level action. The UN, what I would like to do, provide this a little bit of a big picture, what is happening in the UN system. The UN system response to the ambition of the conference is captured in the SDG 6 synthesis report, which was published just 1 month ago. You find it, of course, online. And the synthesis report basically analyzes the situation. And one main message is that one main challenge is lack of policy coherence in our sector at all levels. Now, this is, of course, relevant for system strengthening, because when you need to get the actors together, around the same table, and maybe there are, different policies, conflicting policies also sometimes for driving the actions of the different actors, that is, of course, becomes a problem. So the report comes with very nice recommendations on how to move forward, and actually some of these are already happening. So, for example, I would like to announce that just yesterday at the UN Water meeting, the UN family has decided that to develop a UN system-wide strategy for water and sanitation, which is actually, which is the first one. In 78 years of the UN, there was never a system-wide strategy for water and sanitation. I can't believe it. Now, why am I mentioning that? Because just, some hints on the upcoming discussions, I think that system strengthening needs to be part of the UN system-wide strategy for water and sanitation, and that it needs to link very strongly with the UN reform. So the action at the country level of the UN country teams led by the resident coordinators, because that grounds it, embeds it into a very, a very solid framework of cooperation between the host country and all the other actors. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the rest of the discussion. So handing back to you or to...
to Gilles Stagner from IRC, who is going to moderate the second block. So Gilles, the floor is yours.
So hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. We're going to share a few examples of the initiative on sustainability and system strengthening from both the funding agency's perspective. So we have the FCDO and the UK and DGIS who are funding a lot of initiative on sustainability in countries. And we're going to also hear from government, mainly Nigeria and Liberia. From the funding perspective, DGIS has funded a lot of initiative through the Accelerated Sanitation and Water for All program, and Evita Rosenbeck is going to be sharing some of the findings, some of the outcomes of these initiatives in 8 countries in Africa. We're going to hear then from Nigeria, a typical example of how sustainability and system strengthening in practice, mainly through the sustainability checks that was implemented last year. Then we're going to hear from the FCDO that has worked on integrating water trackers into climate policies. As we know, climate is one of the main constraints in terms of sustainability of water infrastructure. So Andy is going to be presenting on that. And then we're going to end and round up this part of the session with the example of Liberia as presenting concrete step and commitment that were made at high level by the government of Liberia to integrate sustainability in the water sector agenda. So I'm going to leave the floor to Evita, but before doing that, I'm going to give a little bit of practical information for those of you who are in the chat and would like to ask question or participate. Feel free to write your question in the chat box, and we're going to find a few minutes towards the end of the session to respond. And please, when you write your question, make sure that you direct it to the specific speaker. So whether it's FCDO, Evita, Jonathan, or Eugene. I'm leaving the floor now to Evita. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Judith. And good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here speaking to you on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, Department for Development Cooperation. And I'm also speaking to you also on behalf of my colleague Joke Bak, who some of you might know. And it is especially an honor also to, well, to be here together, some in Stockholm, some online in the follow-up of the, I would say, historic UN Water Conference. And I'm personally quite passionate about achieving the human right to water, sanitation, and hygiene, as some of you might know. But I'm also very glad that this has also been a long-standing priority for the Dutch government in achieving sustainable water, sanitation, hygiene services for all forever. And for that reason, the Netherlands has also been a long-standing and reliable WASH donor, as just was mentioned by Gilles. Thank you for that. And we also have been working on a lot of instruments and frameworks to support this sustainability, and also in particular in partnership with UNICEF, IRC, and Sanitation Waterfall, which I will speak to you about a bit more in a few seconds from now. During the UN Water Conference, and earlier you saw a slide of a session that we co-convened, the Netherlands has confirmed its commitment to making concrete and substantial contributions towards SDG6, but also to the Water Action Agenda you might be familiar with. And in particular, we organized this side event, System Strengthening and Leadership for Sustainable Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene for All. And therefore, it's a pleasure to contribute to this session, reconfirm the importance of sustainable wash services and delivery. And I'm also pleased to hear from Federico, who just informed us of what happened during the UN Water meeting yesterday, that a UN system-wide strategy for WASH will be developed. So thank you for that update in particular. During the meeting in New York, it was tabled during the session that to achieve sustainable wash services for all, we need visionary political leadership at the highest level and prioritization and transformative agendas for WASH across the national governments. And these elements should be complemented by national budgets, multi-stakeholder collaboration, and strong WASH systems. Governments need to take responsibility and be accountable for the access of human rights to water and sanitation. For that reason, together with partners as UNICEF, IRC, and Sanitation Water for All, sharing this vision, we came up with this new partnership to ensure the achievement of WASH for all forever. This movement has been called the Heads of State Initiative. Later in the week, there will be more sessions about this, so I'll speak briefly to this in particular. The Heads of States Initiative has been developed to underline all partners, has been registered in the Water Action Agenda and underlining the partners' commitment to this. It was inaugurated during that event, also by the Dutch King, and also in attendance of many CEOs of organizations that are here today. For example, Patrick of IRC, Patrick Moriarty, but also Katrina Albuquerque. And we had attendees, also representatives of the highest political level. The initiative is also supported by the African Development Bank that pledged financial support to the committed countries. During the session, it was also wonderful to see that several countries announced presidential compacts. For example, in Ethiopia, that will revise the loan policy and directives for access to WASH and improve accountability. And Ghana, that will, amongst others, establish a national sanitation authority. But also Liberia, Uganda, and Zimbabwe announced presidential compacts as a head of state initiative to ensure sustainable WASH for all forever. But the UN Water Conference, as you might have heard before, cannot be just another conference. It was not the end, but a starting point. And therefore, it's good that we have this Stockholm World Water Week, but also other conferences. For example, All Systems Connect Symposium that took place last May, organized amongst others by IRC, to work on this, further work on this initiative. on the country level, but also with our Dutch support. And we're very much looking for additional partner cooperation. So therefore, I'm very pleased to invite you also for an information and network session on the Heads of State initiative upcoming Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the morning at the Netherlands Pavilion at Stockholm World Water Week, which you can find on the second floor of the venue. I'll also be there, so feel free to reach out also in the chat box if you would like to learn more. And I'm looking forward to working together on sustainable wash services for all forever. Thank you.
Is it over to me, boss? She'll.
I think so.
Right. So I'm gonna let now Andrew, no, sorry, John, John from, so John is gonna follow up on Evita because John is presenting actually one of the program that was supported by the DGS, the ASWA, through the ASWA 2, the phase 2 of ASWA, which is the sustainability checks in Nigeria. So I'm gonna leave the floor to John to continue his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the name is Jonathan Nekata, a water specialist in Nigeria, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of the government of Nigeria and UNICEF Nigeria. I'm going to speak very quickly on what was done, how the sustainability check was done, and what are the next steps. Go ahead, please. I think before talking about how the sustainability check was done, it is very important that we see what the situation is and why the sustainability check in Nigeria is very important as a tool for system strengthening. As you will see on the slide, we have about 23% of water facilities in the country that are not functional. About 1 in 4 Nigerians still defecate in the open. While knowledge of hygiene practices is very strong at 99%, only about 8% of households can actually demonstrate proper hand washing. And when you go to washing institutions, schools, if you measure wash access using the JMP standard of basic water, sanitation, and hygiene, only 11% will meet the pass mark. And for healthcare facilities, shockingly, only 6% will meet the pass mark for all wash services measured against the JMP standard. So you see why it's become very important that we look at the sustainability of wash facilities and services in Nigeria so that we can have sustained access for all. Next slide, please. So what was the kind of timeline within which this sector-wide sustainability check was done? When we started the ASWA 2 program, generously supported by DGIS, one of the main components of that project was to ensure that water systems are sustainable, and the sustainability check was a strategy to achieve this. So we started with the conceptualization of the whole sustainability check concept, again supported by Siwi and Jorge, our colleague at HQ. We did a lot of consultation, which led to the inauguration of the technical working group by the Federal Ministry of Water Resources. When we saw the process, doing a whole new survey would have been very difficult. So we relied on existing data and did a lot of data sourcing from the WASH National Outcome Routine Mapping, which is a very rich data source that we have here in Nigeria. And thanks to Siwi, we were able to get tools to extract the relevant data that was needed for the sustainability check. Data analysis was done by the National Bureau of Statistics here in Nigeria. We had the first validation meeting with government partners and stakeholders. That led to the drafting of the report, following which the report was revalidated and reviewed and finalized and was launched recently. Next slide, please. So I think it is quite important, especially for other countries that might be on the call and thinking of doing a sector-wide sustainability check for their country, knowing how useful data from such checks could be. It is important to look at the critical considerations that you would like to have if you're developing something like this. For example, for us in Nigeria, I mentioned the sector-wide technical working group was constituted by the government at the national level, which gave it a lot of legitimacy and authority. We got the expertise of colleagues from SIWI, the Stockholm International Water Institute, and without their expertise, I think it would have been very difficult for us to do this. One, we have not done it before. Two, we needed the experience of having done it with other countries to support us to understand and appreciate the process, and also to support us in developing the protocol, the tools, and adopting same. But most importantly, having gotten the national government taking the lead, we needed to select the appropriate indicators, because if you look at the sector-wide sustainability check guideline, the indicators are quite much. So we needed to know which of these indicators are appropriate for the country, which do we have data points for, and which by the analysis will give us some level of understanding to push the process forward. So we did that by identifying and selecting the applicable indicators and factors across the sector. We determined the factors and the weighting to use for measuring, because we didn't have any baseline or any previous sustainability check. And that led us to developing some simple statistical model and tools following the guidelines to complete this. Once that was done, we did the desk review, the data analysis, and we extracted the data and presented the reports to the government. And I will just share in the next slide now a summary of the report. So you will see from what we did, we were able to come up with an index. And we thought this was really important, because if you look at the indicators, they were quite many and very complex. But we needed an index that we could easily use with policymakers to say, look, in Nigeria, this is the index of sustainability. And I will not go into how that was calculated and how we went through a lot of processes and iteration of different tools to get this. But we were able to come up with at least an approximate index that says that 46% of all wash facilities in Nigeria are sustainable. What that means is that at least 54% are not, which is quite a frightening number. And this showed itself actually in the data that we have in the country, where 23% of water facilities, for example, go bad in their first year of operation. So this was quite a telling index for the country. And if you break it down by their component parts, you will see that for water supply, it's 44%, for sanitation, it's 39%, for wash in healthcare facilities, 53%, where they are existing, and for school is 46%, where such facilities are existing. Next slide, please. So I was just mentioning there some of the factors we used. This is only an example. For example, the factors that was used for water supply. So we looked at functionality, we looked at accessibility, availability, quantity, and quality. The preliminary studies that are used for developing the facilities, the alignment with user preference, service providers capacity, financial sustainability, and all of that. And for each of these factors, there were a series of questions and data points collected. Next slide, please. So I think this is the last slide. Having done this sector-wide sustainability check, which is first in Nigeria, we wanted to see what is the next step, because it is not just enough to have another report sitting on the shelf. We want to see that actions are taken by the government and partners in the country to move this forward. So we've come up with a very clear plan, and I will summarize them in these 3 steps with the government of Nigeria to develop a sector-wide response plan, which will lead to a sustainability compact, which will be signed by the government to show their commitment to improve sustainability of services in the country. We also want to make sure that we incorporate these findings into sector policies, regulations, and practices. And I'm quite happy that, like I mentioned last week, for example, the Ministry of Water Resources, which we had before, had now been upgraded, if you like, into a Federal Ministry of Water Resources and Sanitation, which we think is a very good step. And this we continue going forward. And we also want to see that while we have done this one using existing data, that the next set of sustainability check will include very robustly climate resilience indicators and dimensions and urban wash dimensions beyond what we already have in this first round of sector-wide sustainability check. So thank you very much. This is just by way of sharing with you what was done in Nigeria and how we did it. Over to you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It was really impressive, really interesting how the outcomes of the report are going to be translated into policy development, because that's the end of the goal. We really want government to take ownership of the result and really put in place practical tools and policy in order to develop sustainability. So thank you so much. I'm going to leave the floor now to Andrew. Andrew has been involved at the global level in discussions around water resilience, whether it's from the agricultural standpoint and energy, transport. So really bridging all the sectors that are involved in understanding water resilience, and his role at the FCDO is also involved in the development of a tool to help countries enhance and assess the integration of water resilience into the national climate plan. So Andrew is going to be speaking about that and speaking about specific examples from countries that have been successful in developing these. Thank you. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Gilles. That's and it's really good to be here. I might be slightly distracted by a certain football match later in the day, but I don't think it's given that
we're working together.
Given that Nigeria might be beaten by the world champions. Hopefully, hopefully we'll see. Yes, and indeed, let's see. No, yeah, really good to be here. I work for the Foreign Office, which, as you probably know, we were two separate organizations, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Department for International Development. It's been quite a tumultuous few years for us doing development work. I come from that side of the house in the British government. We've had cuts, we've had changes of government, we've had changes of direction. And definitely underlying all of that have been some other quite much bigger shifts in the way that we're doing development and assistance. And I think the word is the P word, it's the partnership word that I would like to stress. And I think this example that I'm going to talk to you about is a very good way of building partnerships and letting countries determine their own destinies and future. But just to take you back to the origins of our work in water and WASH in the FCDO, we were a single directorate, very interestingly, and I think strategically made the error of splitting off water and putting it into the environment section and WASH and putting it into the health section. That meant that we were setting indicators and giving budgets depending on environmental outputs and health outputs. Now, isn't that a crazy way to do things? I think it has left us with a legacy of thinking in silos and working in silos. Happily, climate change has brought us back together again, and I work in the environment climate section of the FCDO, together very closely with Paul Deverill and others in the WASH section. So climate change has brought us together, and it's brought us together to think in an integrated way. It was really good to hear from Nigeria about the work that you've done. It was one of the countries when we were evaluating our WASH investments where we also noticed this problem of sustainability of the investment. And indeed, we drew a lot of lessons from Nigeria. So it's great to see that you've taken that work to the next level. And it'd be really good to talk to you about that. And we developed some thinking because our investments in WASH were unsustainable. They were not working. Why was this? Well, we felt that it was largely because we didn't get the governance right, we didn't get the flows of revenue, we didn't get the operations and maintenance right. The context was wrong, and that had not been the focus of our investments. So WASH systems strengthening has emerged as something that we have led the thinking on. We've just launched a brand new program at UN Water Conference for WASH systems strengthening. And the key word here is transformational. It's trying to shift systems from one level to another level. The way that water shifts to ice and ice shifts to and water shifts to steam. These are different states. This is what we're intending to do. So on to COPs. I work on the COPs, the Conference of the Parties for Climate Change. As you know, they produce these things called NDCs, which are nationally determined contributions. These are the national plans, primarily determine our reduction in emissions, so mitigation. What's that got to do with WASH and water, you might ask? So NAPs were generated as a second string of national plans. It must be quite bewildering to be in government in a developing country, asked to produce plan after plan after plan in different formats. But NAPs are national adaptation plans. Much more about water in and WASH in there, because of course climate change is felt through water. And as you know, at COP26, the UK really pushed adaptation up the agenda. And now we have global stocktakes, and now we have global goals on adaptation, 2 new initiatives going on this year. We're deeply involved in the negotiations on that. The stocktake is really important, as it now includes the impact of climate change on water. The global goal for adaptation will feature water and WASH as one of the sets of indicators to know that you have adapted to climate change and you are resilient. Finally, I want to talk about the water tracker. This initiative arose from all this discussion around how you build partnerships with countries. Instead of imposing things on them, how do you get countries in the driving seat? And we developed this diagnostic tool. Initially, we thought, let's call it a scorecard. Actually, we don't like that language. That implies it's a teacher scoring a child. This is the wrong relationship. So we sat down with Egypt, Malawi, and Costa Rica and said, let's develop this thing together. And the initiators of this really intellectually were AGWA, the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. We provided a little bit of funding. I'm glad to say the Dutch were also here, joined in. And we developed this tool jointly with those 3 countries. And it's a very simple diagnostic. It's a set of questions that you ask yourself as a government, assisted by a consultant, a local consultant, importantly, which with a yes and a no answer. The no answer leads you down an action plan route. It's now rolled out to 10, or I think it's over 10 countries now. And we're linking it to other initiatives. One on governance, which is about creating the right regulatory environment with pricing and things like that, which will improve the market conditions for the third and final element, which is increased investment. And we want a lot more of this investment to come from the private sector. We know they're interested, but the governance isn't right. The policy environment isn't right. Those things have to be in place first. And I think the main thing finally to end with is that from a WASH point of view, this water tracker tool is a way, it includes a lot of WASH elements in it as it should. It's a way for WASH to be integrated back together with the other sectors that it is codependent upon. For example, the agriculture sector. And so it's a good example of a donor, in this case, the UK and the Netherlands, stepping back from direct investment in infrastructure and shifting the way we do business into policy change led by the government of the country we're trying to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andy, for your brief and your presentation. We'll hopefully come back to the question afterward. Interesting connection as again to the policy development, but also be interesting to hear more about how countries, some of the countries you mentioned, were successful in funding. So we know that finance and funding is one of the key bottleneck when it comes to system strengthening sustainability in a lot of countries. So maybe through the question we'll have to go back to that and you can explain it a little bit more. I'm going to leave the floor now to Eugene from Liberia. Liberia has done a lot. So as you know, committing to sustainability require high-level buy-in from the government. We have an example from Liberia of how the country was able to commit at all level, whether it's in terms of finance, in terms of institutional strengthening, in terms of capacity development, policy reform, in order to achieve sustainability outcomes. So Eugene from Liberia is going to tell us a little bit more about how that was that was done in Liberia. So I'm leaving the floor to you, Eugene, or anyone from Liberia who is willing to present. Thank you.
Hi, I don't know if that worked. I mean, yeah, I'm not Eugene. I'm Ricard Giné. I'm from the Stockholm International Water Institute. A pleasure being here today. Basically, yeah, I mean, the idea was to connect with Liberia, but this has not been possible. So on their behalf, basically, what I would like to highlight is that CB has been supporting the government of Liberia through UNICEF in developing this compact. And just to say that basically it has been a long process. As you've just said, Gilles, is not only an issue of developing a new policy framework, it's trying to make sense of the different pieces of the puzzle, how they connect to each other. And the process started a couple of years back when there was a national workshop to try to set up what were the bottlenecks of the regulation framework, trying to identify those and trying to address those, basically trying to push for a new legislative reform. Back to this WASHBAT workshop, the country also embedded into a national WASHBAT, a bottleneck analysis. And I think that these two pieces of the puzzle, together with some other national diagnosis, basically they put in the picture all the main challenges that the country wanted to address. This was done, and it is also important, through a national dialogue, including and integrating all main sector stakeholders. And basically, at the end of the process, they did a final joint sector review, basically with the aim to, based on the good identification of the main challenges, try to identify and prioritize those actions that were needed in the country to push the waste sector forward. And I think that, there were a set of commitments set out by the country, again, by all stakeholders, but I would like to highlight a couple of those. The main one is, I think, legislative reform, trying to push for a new Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, that this, of course, should lead the sector forward, and other related commitments. There's another important one, and this relates to finance, trying to set up and set aside a specific budget line for the waste sector. There was also a huge commitment to fully integrate the climate perspective and the climate issues into the delivery of waste services. There was also an important one speaking to monitoring and evaluation, trying to push for a new monitoring and information system in the country. So I think that this is a nice example, because basically this tried to link with all what has been said by previous examples, linking to climate, linking to monitoring and evaluation, linking to a new Ministry of and the legislative and policy reform. So, I mean, yeah, I probably forgot some of the commitments that were set out in the final compact, but I think that the main ones are these ones. So back to you, Gilles. It's a pity that colleagues from Liberia cannot be able to connect, but I think that at least to spotlight what has been done and the main outputs of this process. Back to you, Gilles.
Thank you so much, Ricard, for stepping in to deliver this. We will, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to let some time for questions towards the end. So I'm going to leave the floor to the next part of the session, and I'm going to leave the floor to Kevin Russell, who's going to be moderating that part. Thank you so much. So.
Thank you, Gilles. Thank you, all the speakers. I think it is really inspirational. When you join a webinar of this nature, you don't often know how many other people have joined and who's as dedicated to system strengthening as you are. Well, I'm glad to tell you that there are 52 of us on this call at this point in time, as we go into the panel discussion. And I thought I'd just maybe lead with a really interesting point, picking up from what Andy was saying about where the divisions are of water and sanitation. At the beginning of the UN Water Conference on the continent of Africa, we only had 4 ministries of water and sanitation. As we said now, we actually have 6, Nigeria joining the party and Sierra Leone a couple of weeks ago. And I have to admit that apart from climate change, elections are exciting now because elections present an opportunity to bring us together. And I think within our WASH community, system strengthening is bringing us together. We are becoming more and more united and clear in what we're going. So the next panel, the panelists we've invited, Alejandro Jimenez from SIWI and Farai Tanuma, are going to take us through these next steps. And in particular, I'm going to ask them two questions, but let me do that first speaker. Alejandro, question for you in terms of the next steps and how to take sustainability and system strengthening forward. What do you see as the key barriers? And obviously, more importantly, what are the greater opportunities that come out of those? Over to you, Alejandro.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, many of the barriers have been already been mentioned by previous speakers. No, we have been listening how aspects such as silo thinking and dividing WASH from water resources from climate has not been helpful in the wider perspective. A little bit of lack of systems thinking, we would say, and how linking WASH with the wider political environment and other sector and non-sectoral policies. No, when someone has mentioned the policy coherence, that's a very important element. I think Federico at the beginning that it's something that we have to work much more on. I think I would add to that as well, perhaps that we have had the insufficient long-term vision and engagement with the different policy processes, because there are initiatives that set up ambitious objectives, but we know that social services as water need long-term to really realize these new policies and get the benefits out of that. We can't get tired so quickly. And that is very important in terms of the government policies, but also the donor support and the stakeholders' commitment to a certain process. This is also made difficult sometimes because of the problems of changing in government priorities. It is often that new governments bring new visions, but also, again, some fundamental aspects such as water management cannot be changed every 3 years, because if not, you won't have time to see the benefit of what you were doing. So this is important, that there is some agreements within the countries, and also I think that in that regard, civil society is very important, and the wider society to push the politicians, the government in place to keep to certain aspects that we think are fundamental for a long-term development of the sector. So I'll stop it here because
Perfect.
I want also to
excellent.
Farai.
Excellent, and thanks for reinforcing the other statements. Farai, same question to you. What do you see as the big barriers? And maybe you can start leading in opportunities, and I'll come back to Alejandro. Over to you, Farai.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Really great to be in this very interesting discussion and to really see some of the links between the work that we do on the ground and how that really culminates to the changes that we want to see at a country level, but also the steps that we take towards really achieving SDGs 6.1 and 6.2. It's through these individual efforts that we really get collective results coming through in the sector. Just a bit on some of the barriers that I would like to highlight, and we see this whether it's in the UN system or even at a country level. The WASH sector is quite fragmented, and we really welcome the strategy that we'll be working together on as UN Water. And like you mentioned, indeed, Kevin, we also want to see that alignment also coming through how the government ministries really work together and complement each other. We see a lot of configurations of the WASH sector, sometimes with health, with agriculture, with environment, with education, really spread through very, very different configurations. Acceleration is a big one. We have seen progress when you look at the JMP results for sub-Saharan Africa, for least developed countries, but we still see a growing gap, particularly around access to basic services. And it sounds like we are still in the MDG era when we still find access to basic services being a challenge. And then, of course, money flows. We really need to have the right quantum of money flows. When we see institutions, for example, the UNFCCC championing climate, they speak in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And that is the quantum of investment that we do need to see also coming through for the WASH sector. And it's something that governments and development partners alone cannot achieve. It's something that we do need to draw in private sector, civil society, sometimes even the individual households to also contribute and really make sure that we see sustained services. In terms of opportunities, I'm quite excited, having been in the UN Water meetings yesterday, having attended the UN Water 2023 conference, to see the optimism. And now we need to turn that optimism into action on the ground. We made lots of commitments as individuals, as organizations during the water conference. Now is the time to really turn those commitments into specific, measurable, achievable, and time-bound commitments where we are accountable to ourselves as organizations, but also to the communities that we live in and that we serve. So for me, that's a big opportunity, that reflection around our commitments. 2030 is really by our doorstep. So those commitments really now need to translate into actions. I'm quite excited by the examples we've seen from Liberia and Nigeria, where the governments themselves are really in the driving seat of solutions and the change that we want to see. And it's really about making those collective efforts to support these governments to be able to deliver on their commitments, but also it's an opportunity through our joint sector review mechanisms to also see governments being the choir masters of all these different commitments that we have put together as different organizations, civil society, that work in countries, because as a collective would be able really to achieve a lot of these results. Andy mentioned the whole point around intercorp processes and how the WASH sector is represented in all those. And we do need to reflect on how we show up in these conversations, whether it's on biodiversity or food systems or climate. And I'm glad to say on the climate, we are starting to get a handle of some of these processes as a sector. So there's really a lot of opportunities, Kevin, and a lot of tools. We've seen a lot of them coming through today. But I'll hand over back to you, Kevin, to see where we can take this conversation.
Thank you so much, Farai. As somebody else who attended that UN Water meeting, you've summarized all of the exciting opportunities in less than 2 minutes. It's quite an achievement. Well done, Farai. Alejandro, you've got some really difficult shoes to follow now. What are the opportunities you see beyond, and maybe reinforce what Farai said because it's so brilliant, but do you see any other opportunities you'd like to add?
Well, I think from my perspective, it is important that we really use as well political opportunities and political windows. You mentioned the opportunities of elections. As I was mentioning before, I think that water policies need to be state policies, need to be national policies that survive a short period, and we have to work on that. And I celebrate the Head of States initiative because that would also bring this to the highest political level. But we also need to work harder on accountability, as I wanted to mention, the reinforcement of civil society that can then make the governments accountable to what they have promised and what their commitments are, because this is really important to make them happen. I think we have the opportunities with all what's happening to change the incentives as well at the national local level for increased collaboration across sector, more transparency and dialogue across donors and governments, so that we can construct the agenda in a more horizontal and long-term and sustainable way. And I think I will end up by saying that it's really important as well to celebrate the successes, that to collect the good stories that are happening, because if not, we can very easily get depressed of what's going on. But there are very interesting initiatives going on, and there have been wonderful examples in this session and others that are around, and we need to continue to learn from that, collect those experiences, disseminate, and see how in a peer-to-peer approach other countries can take on good examples. So I leave it there, because there might be questions and other comments around.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, both of you, for your presentations. And I think it's been really excellent. When one deals with system strengthening, the first challenge is systems blindness. Do people see the system? And then obviously once they see it, you can do something about it. I think all the speakers from the first panel, of course, your two inputs have been really helpful. I'm going to hand over to Gilles now to do the Q&A. And I have to admit, when we were designing this session, we wanted to be as interactive as possible. We were expecting a lot of things in the chat box. The speakers have been way too coherent. You've left no space for questions. So I'm going to encourage people to be brave, ask hard questions. The speakers can take them. And if you don't have a question, show some support and love, because this has been brilliant. Over to you, Gilles.
Thank you, everyone, and great exposure, Farai and Alejandro, to some of the topic that we're discussing today. I have one question, and I think that question is directed to Andy, and I'm glad that someone asked. It's a question regarding, and Farai mentioned earlier, when we talk about water resilience, we talk about resilience and long-term use of water resources. There's an issue about an understanding trade-off between sectors, right? We have the agricultural, the food agricultural industry, we have the energy, we have the transport industry, we have also ecological needs, right? So how do you really balance? So I have a question regarding the specific use of non-renewable groundwater resources. How is it being integrated in those policies, and especially climate plans, and the water resilience tools that you're using? So if you can draw from a specific example from countries, the countries that you mentioned that successfully developed this plan, how can you speak a little bit about that? Thank you.
Giles, definitely not an easy question to answer. I will attempt to answer that question. And I think just to start off by saying we understand groundwater a bit more than we did many, many years ago. We now understand the dangers of mining fossil water, but we have also learned a lot in terms of how, when we integrate good practice into our water resources management approaches, we are also then able to harness and to really increase the recharge of our groundwater resources. So indeed, as UNICEF, we are really working towards application of sustainability principles on our water supply systems. And at the same time, we are also saying, are we really looking at water as a conjunctive resource? So are we using all the water resources that we have, not just the groundwater, but the rainwater? Are we using our surface water as we should? And even more so, we start to see also shifts around even desalination, so that we are even able to increase the fresh water resources that we have. So in this space, it's really a lot of work in progress. We are building a lot of partnerships with organizations that would often not work with because of some of the blind sides that we had, but are now really trying to bring in sustainability in the work that we do. So this again is a partnership, and I think that's one of the lessons, particularly when we think about accelerating services. We now really need to strengthen those partnerships that allow us to understand our resources a bit more and to protect them a bit more. And that's why it's important, even as we make the links with intergovernmental processes, transboundary water systems, and so on, we really look at water, not just the drop that I use, but really understanding where that drop comes from and how I can ensure that the next person can use it again and again through our recycling approaches as well. So it's complex. We don't have all the answers. We are building partnerships around it. We are starting to understand our blind spots, and we continue to strive to really look after the environment so that it can look after us as well.
Thank you so much, Farah. And Andrew I'm seeing Andrew raising his hand. So I'm going to give you the floor, Andrew. Thank you.
I'm gonna mute. All right, there'll be Yeah, no, that was a really good answer, I must say. I was going to add that the question about other sectors. I mean, I wasn't the only one to notice that there were very few farmers at the UN Water Conference. There were very few energy people. Yeah, we have to work harder at talking as water people to these other sectors, and obviously everybody knows that agriculture is the big water user. The trade-offs are sometimes very clear. What is not also so clear is that agriculture is the biggest single polluter of water systems. And farmers themselves are our water managers in practice. And we don't talk to them. It's not water utilities that really manage water in a hydrological cycle. It's the farmer, principally. And the question about groundwater is a really good one. The fossil water, I think, as you intimated, Faria, that without replenishment, this really should not be done. You need to have measures in place, and one of those key measures is keeping water in the landscape, which brings you back to the farmer. If the farmer is the land manager or the forester or the conservation group or the private landowner, they need to be thinking about measures that hold water back and allow it to seep down into the substrata and then to replenish groundwater. Now, in parts of Africa, that is a long way down. That is a long way down, and I'm not saying that there's a simple technological solution to get fossil water replenished, far from it, but at least you can keep it available for future use. And it's the best example I know of resilient water, because when the water's disappeared from the surface, it doesn't evaporate in exactly the same way at the speed that it does in a reservoir. So let's think about other forms of storage that are resilient to climate change. Thanks.
So much, Andrew. I'm gonna find out. So we have 3 minutes left, and gonna address one question that was submitted, and I think it was to John, about the scaling up capacity of the tools or the what was used in Nigeria. So the sustainability check. How scalable do you think? How replicable do you think this type of tool or strategy can be used in other countries? So Jonathan, maybe you can in 1 minute summarize in response to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll say very quickly, yes, it is scalable. What you need to do is adapt it to your context. So what do you have? What don't you have? What benefit will it be? And what is the value addition of doing this to your policy, to fundraising, to finance? Whatever you want to do, you adapt the tools to your context, and then you could definitely replicate it. I think every country can do it, to be honest. And I think there is value in doing it.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the floor. Jorge, do you have any other ending remark or and?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all speakers, all participants for being here today on a Monday morning for many of us here in Europe, in many parts of the world, afternoon, evening in other parts of the world, competing with the final of the Women's World Cup in a few minutes. And we will watch the game hopefully together. And thank you for being in this session and not in others. I know that there are many interesting sessions running in parallel, and there are, of course, many others organized during this Stockholm Motor Week that is just starting today. So stay tuned. Hopefully, we will see each other in other sessions during the week. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.